My name is Robert Wells, and I go by Bob, and I served in the U.S. Navy after graduation from UCLA in 1977. I spent 30 years in the U.S. Navy. I had commanded two ships, one of which was the USS Lake Champlain right after 9/11. I'm the author of the book, Voices from the Bottom of the South China Sea, and I really appreciate the chance to tell people about the story. After I left San Diego, after I left command, I was detailed to the White House, and I was on the staff of the Vice President of the United States, and I had the chance to work on the preparations for Hu Jintao's state visit in 2005. And we went to a restaurant called the Oval Room right around from the White House, and we talked about the U.S.-China experience and the economic trade. Where did it all begin? And from that conversation, my curiosity was piqued, and I went ahead and looked at, well, what carried all these dollars and treasure? Where did the trade all start? And I found a ship that had been lost and not even recovered back in the late 1870s. And from that point on, every time I asked the question, it seemed to deliver. The SS Japan itself is a very important ship for the United States, and it's interesting, this year we're celebrating or recognizing the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. About 6 weeks before he was assassinated, he authorized the building of these 4 largest steamships in the world. And the political pressure back east was to compel the China trade to basically have these large ships for the mail to get business and also have passengers, up to 1,200 passengers per ship. Coincidentally, the big 4, Leland Stanford, former governor of California, Crocker, in particular Crocker, wanted to get more workers to support the Central Pacific Railroad, which is the focal point of their particular effort to get across the Sierras. And this demand signal came across at the same time that Abraham Lincoln's former ambassador to China, Anson Burlingame, became the Chinese ambassador to the treaty power. So it was a perfect storm of diplomacy and economics and opportunity, where you had these ships, you had the demand to finish the railroad, and you had this diplomat that set up that Burlingame Treaty. So it was all 1868, and that's where I started the story. Arduous passage across the Pacific. Sometimes they were good to get calm seas. They were well cared for the most part, because they were contract labor. They had paid $45 to $50 in gold per person to either lent by the contractor in Guangdong or the Pacific or the 6 companies benevolent associations, those relationships. So that's an important part of the story, is that these were free contract laborers that were coming to the United States through Hong Kong on American flag vessels. One of the things that was new with the Pacific Mail steamship relationship with these Chinese was that before the 6 companies would actually execute a contract to give them the labor they needed to support the Central Pacific Railroad or any other endeavor in California, they needed to assure that if the Chinese member died in California, that his remains would be embalmed or his bones would be returned to China, so that the Confucian tradition could be supported. That is, their soul would be allowed to go to heaven after their bones rested in China. It's an enduring thing, and one of the factors that I think the Voices story brings out is that this American company, the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, really did care about honoring their commitment to the Chinese. And I found this particular direct quote in an unpublished manuscript, which was an oral history up at Yale University, that told me exactly how this particular arrangement was brokered after the steamship service came online. The dream of the Chinese that came from Guangdong province in each respective area that they came from was to come to Gold Mountain and to make, as their previous generation did, and to try to live those stories, to make $300 or $400 and to come back and to live a wealthy person or a wealthy man. Many did that, and they stayed 3 or 4 years. They didn't want to remain in the United States. They wanted to go back home with money they had made. Many were able to accumulate $300 or $400, and that was very important for where they came from. During this period of time, it was the end of the Taiping Rebellion. You had the Hakka and the Punti Wars down there in Guangzhou. You had a very, very difficult way of life, especially around Taishan and Kaiping. These are tough places, rocky soil, and you still have people that have traditional roles in their family, and they were looking to make their life better. The SS Japan was the largest sidewheel steamer in the world during her final voyage, and she was about 4,000 tons. She was about 360 feet and 55 feet wide, and fully loaded she weighed just about 5,000 tons. She had cargo fore and aft. Down in her coal holds, she could hold 1,800 tons of coal. She used 45 tons of coal per day. During her final voyage, she was using up to 55 tons of coal per day. Down in that fire room, it was 135 degrees. It had to make 20 pounds of pressure in order to move that 105-inch single beam piston to basically turn those 40-foot side wheels. And her speed of advance going across the Pacific was 9 knots, literally a slow boat to China. That's why it took so long. When they left San Francisco on the Japan, they usually took a southwesterly course and got to the 30-degree north latitude line so she can shoot Polaris and find out where they were. And it took that 22 days to get across to Yokohama, where they came up into Tokyo Bay. She's a great ship, though, and it's interesting to note when she got to Tokyo Bay and talking about coal and talking about the possibility of fires on these all-wooden ships, that her predecessor was another beautiful sidewheel steamer named the SS America. And 2 years prior to that, she also had a coal fire in Yokohama, was lost, total loss, had some treasure on board. But the captains, the people that were riding these ships, knew the dangers based on coal. She had a great record. The SS Japan made 24 successful cruises, and she carried an average of about 400 or 500. One or two times I found in research she carried upwards of 1,200. But for the most part, I would say she had less than 10,000 of the total population that she brought across directly. Her sister ships also had about the same record. The part of the Japan I find to be very, very interesting, though, is the matching of the ship with the regions that the Chinese immigrants came from to their captains. And I've provided 4 different captains, 4 different ships, and I've got the actual regions. I don't have the names, but I do have, through the customs records and through primary source research, where they came from, what ships they came on, where they landed in San Francisco, and I'm trying to bring that story to the conversation. I think everyone that I've worked with, my history professor and mentor, Robert Dallek, and other Asia-Pacific studies professors, including May Nye, say that, Bob, you have to tell this story. Tell us how we got here. The entire story of the Japan through its service life from 1868 to 1874 and that 25 voyages, you saw the pendulum go from we welcome you, we want you to build the railroads, we want you to help us in Napa Valley, we want you to put the rice paddies in the Sacramento River Delta, to not so fast. We want to regulate you because you're causing some labor grief inside San Francisco, especially in the mid-1870s before her final voyage. And then 1874 is a very critically important year. Before the Page Act in March of 1875, it really does start the road to exclusion. The Japan is also the ship that had the what they call the 23 maidens, which were the women that came across, and there was 90 of them on the vessel, but 23 of them basically were remanded to the ship, and the 6 companies had prescribed a writ of habeas corpus, and that went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, still as the first case law, Chai Lung versus Freeman, 1875, from the decks of the SS Japan. But they were welcome here during the initial voyages, and then they were told not so many and you need to go back. In fact, the aftermath of the SS Japan is another story, another narrative, which is what happened on the docks of the Pacific Mail Company, what happened with the Kearney and the Sandlot riots in San Francisco. How were the passions really, really generated by all this Chinese labor coming over, influencing now the completed transcontinental railroad labor coming across to California, modern shipping, modern trade that was instituted in San Francisco. So there's so much richness here with regard to the story along the docks of the Pacific Mail that I think have been rediscovered by telling this story. The Pacific Mail Steamship Company was really the only sole source, if you will, competition for the dream that Abraham Lincoln signed, which was build me these ships for the Pacific Mail Service, bring some passengers over. The $500,000 subsidy was needed for coal. You're talking about a totally different infrastructure for 4,000-ton ships. They had to build new coal bunkers there. They had to provide new rail services there. They didn't have enough carrying passengers on the third class and the first class passengers to pay on many different voyages. You also had to establish new facilities in Yokohama for coal, and you had to have new agents in the Pacific, to support this particular trade. So there was a lot going on there with regard to the business end. It was they were not always making money. They were always they bet on older technology, and they had to get to screw technology. They finally did in 1874 and 1875. But overall, they needed to have the upfront money to basically build the infrastructure to really do trans-Pacific sidewheel trade. I want readers to take away the contributions that the Chinese have made to building America, and also that there was another story that doesn't have anything to do with the exclusion, that there was a period of hope, and that's the point I was trying to make in the book, that you had the newest republic, which is the United States, 37-star flag with the oldest civilization, old China, new America. You have a strong people-to-people relationship that still exists to this day, that we respect the Chinese. I think their role in America, especially after the Civil War, needs to be revisited, especially during the 1860s, early 1870s, before the exclusion laws. I think there's a lot there, and I think what they contributed to should be learned.